You are a public servant. It shouldn't be so difficult to talk to you.
We got dribbled by President Ramaphosa.
Being a majority in parliament doesn't mean we can easily just sweep something under the carpet.
Show me a senior ANC politician
Exactly.
that has been in court. You won't find it.
Actually, exactly what I said to him to say, and he was saying, no, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong on the display. No, mostly you get it wrong. Sort of squeeze all the sentiments in this 1 hour interview. But that's what people are feeling. They're feeling robbed. They're feeling betrayed. There
we go.
And there we are. And on that note, it switches off.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. Professor Tabane, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Sizwe. Thank you for inviting me.
What was it like to interview the president? If anyone has not seen your interview with President Ramaphosa, you had 17 minutes and you managed to deliver one of the most masterful political interviews I've seen with President Ramaphosa in that time. Take us through behind the scenes. What was it like to interview him? He gives very few interviews and you had a chance. You cornered him, I think, 72 times in 17 minutes. What was that like?
Look, first of all, thank you. It's good to always get feedback, but that kind of interview is highly pressured. First of all, we get it once a year, clearly, because the last time I interviewed him was a year ago in Polokwane on the sidelines of January 8, straight after his speech. In the afternoon, we went there. This year, we are planning to do the same thing. We're in Bloemfontein. And then they suddenly said, no, well, he's not available. Please, we're going to Cape Town. And then suddenly it became Johannesburg. So we were in Bloem to interview him. That's the only reason I went there, clearly. I wasn't there to cover the thing because we've got many capable political reporters who do that very well. So now we had to come back to Joburg in a hurry. We flew back this Sunday and then there we are. And then Pulemabi, this story needs to be told because it has to do with how the ANC operates in terms of its communications. He says, well, no, let's just do a quiet interview. So all the broadcasters in one room, just interview him and you've got an hour. And we said, no. We argued with him. It was quite an ugly scene there. And he and Mzwandile came to blows. Actually, Mzwandile from the SABC came to blows about it. And eventually we agreed, okay, 20 minutes each person. Right, one after the other. So that will still be your 1 hour. But, because when you are interviewing somebody in a quiet format, a press conference format, it's not easy to follow up because you are the only one who knows what's your line of questioning. But the person who's conducting the quiet, in this case, Pulemabi, would cut you and say, ask your next question or you can't follow up, let's ask somebody else. And when it's getting heated, he can even intervene. So we wanted to avoid that. Right? So President Ramaphosa has run away from the press. That's what makes it difficult. If I've spoken to him a year ago, you can imagine how many things I want to ask him. Since last year's SONA, since last year's January 8th. And so when you have 20 minutes, you have to pick one or two issues. So I thought I'll pick Pala Pala because it was topical. Yeah. But of course not topical for the ANC delegates, by the way. They didn't bother. Just topical for all of us. And then pick ESCOM, which has proved now that it is a crisis. In fact, I'll be repeating one small clip of that in my show to just demonstrate that he is. I use the word blasé, right? Because he says, "Oh no, don't ask me. You want me to comment about everything?" I said, "No, I don't want you to comment about everything and the fly that's on my forehead," as he said. I want you to comment about ESCOM, right? Because it is actually a very, very crucial issue. And with those kind of interviews, the nuance can get lost. So, for example, I said to him, were you briefed that why the CEO was fired? I was quite deliberate about it. I was not mistaken. Yeah. And then he says, no, he didn't resign. He was not fired, he resigned. Yeah. But actually, my information is that he was fired. And all I wanted to test was whether a head of state is he briefed about a serious situation like the departure of an ESCOM CEO. The reality is, and the board chair of ESCOM will come and talk to me again, deny if he likes, that the board was unhappy with him. They put to him several issues, including malfeasance in tenders, in things like that. I can only summarize, right? that were difficult for him to answer, and he had to go. Right, and what they did behind the scenes to try to cushion it so that he exits with dignity and 3 months and what is neither here nor there. It doesn't make him not to be fired. But of course they'll deny that. I'm used to that kind of thing. But I'm waiting for the chair of ESCOM to come and clarify for me what actually went down. So those are so like I'm saying, in 17 minutes. You can't pursue those nuances. So I couldn't say to him, no, he was fine. I tried to argue with him. We tried to just get what you can and run.
I don't think people appreciate how difficult it actually is, because you see an interview and you always think, I could have done that or I could have said that. But I remember when I interviewed former President Zuma, right? I had been very, and I was still quite new at interviewing, and I'd been very critical of him. Yeah. But when he came in the room, I was like, I'm actually going to interview this person who I've only ever seen on TV. And you can't underestimate that when a president walks in a room and you have hard questions to ask, it might have an impact. What was it like, and how do you deal with an interview like that where you've got the most powerful person in the country and you have to actually ask difficult questions? That's just not an easy thing to do, just on a personal level.
It's true. I mean, it has to do with how many years we have done this. So with President Ramaphosa, we've developed like a banter each time we meet. And he's sort of a little blunt with me when he, even off camera. For example, in 2019, when we launched Newsroom Africa, I made a suggestion that, look, we're launching a new channel. We should get our first interview must be the head of state when we open. And for weeks he had refused. His officer said, not a chance, because it was a week before an election, and they thought this is going to be bad. So I met him at a funeral. I think it was Mogoeng Mogoeng's husband's funeral. And he was standing alone with his bodyguards, and he invited me to come into this security circle to talk to him. And it was just me and him. No aides, no hanger-ons, just me and him. And he said to me with a straight face, "You ask too many awkward questions. So I doubt I'm going to come." So I said, "No, Mr. President."
Wow.
"Please don't worry." Right, and this was just me and him. There was a clip on Twitter where I look at him funny, and people used it to say, "Me," but this is what happened within us. So I said to him, "No, it won't be so bad, because it won't just be me. It will be my colleagues. When I have Kathim Tsholanang, I'm going to have Tulas Simelani, and it will be a round table, a nice round table, head of state, we're a new channel, please do come." I mean, this is what happened behind the scenes. It's not like you have to come, you have to beg somebody or make him feel it's going to be comfortable. I said, it's a week before elections. I mean, we wouldn't want to have a bad interview. I mean, imagine me saying that to him, right? And I know it was going to be a bad interview, but I had to tell him, sorry, just come, And then Zizi, who's a friend of mine, and we've been, we've known each other for years, called me afterwards and said, "No, what did you say to the president? He came to the office and changed his mind. And we told him, we know you, that when lights are on, you lose all respect for anybody in front of you." So anyway, long story short, he came and it was bad. We had budgeted an hour and a half, and then at 60 minutes, the director said to us in our ear, "You got to stop now. They're coming to extract him." That's how bad. He was going to watch that interview. It was becoming bad towards the end.
It's so interesting, because people don't understand what happens behind an interview and what it takes to get an interview.
They say to you, "What are you going to ask him?" I said, I have a standard answer, and I've interviewed people for years. I've been on air since 2016. And my whole approach when I took over Power Perspective on Power FM was that I want all these ministers, all of them. I made a list from the president down, and I haven't managed to interview JZ. You beat me to it, but everybody else.
There are levels to the game.
I know. Everybody else has come, and the idea was we come and have an open conversation with politicians. Yeah. The way you invited me here, you didn't say this is a list. No, we're having an open conversation. If you are a politician, you are paid to do this thing. You must be able to barge on your work. Right? Throughout. I can help you with some broad themes, but really to be a whole list of the agenda. So, Zizi and his team says, what are you going to talk about? I gave him 6 themes. I said, health, education, all the things that are important, but not what are you going to ask. I have a standard answer with that. If you say to me, what are the questions I ask you, what are the answers? Because how will I follow up? So it's not fair that I give you the questions, you don't tell me how you're going to answer, so I don't know how to follow up. So rather, let's just have an open conversation to do that. So there is that behind the scene thing of, but what's what I've always said to people, the whole time that I've been on air, each time you ask somebody, for example, it took me 6 months to get Mogoeng Mogoeng to his first interview. Right, but the second interview took an hour to persuade him because I was launching a new TV show on SABC. The president cancelled me because it was a weekend where they were going to fire Jacob Zuma. So he cancelled. He said, I can't come because I can't talk about this. Yeah. So I said to Mogoeng Mogoeng, you're the next best thing. Please, can you come? He left Mabatu to come and talk to me. Right? But the first request took 6 months. The next one took another 6 months, so it's no formula. The recent one that I had with him, when he was finished as Chief Justice, he said, the Lord is still talking to me. When the Lord has spoken, I'll come. I said, let's wait for the Lord. And I folded my arms. And then whenever he was ready, he said, the Lord has said yes. I said, right, here are the dates, please come. So there's a lot of behind the scenes. And with the guests that we usually have on my shows, these take long to organize sometimes because it has to do with the comfort levels, but it also has to do with the political timing. Take, for example, interviewing somebody like Minister Sisulu. Minister Sisulu has done everything not to come and talk to me for the whole of last year after she wrote that controversial opinion piece, or supposedly wrote it, right? She refused to come. She even insulted me, on WhatsApp. I don't know that she wasn't afraid I could just publish the WhatsApps. But I just thought, whatever. I just told her, you are a public servant. It shouldn't be so difficult to talk to you. Honest. That was my parting shot. That's when I've given up on you now. Basically, I'm saying, you come, you don't come, it's your problem. She was on my show 2 months ago because now suddenly she's a campaigner to be in office. The situation is different. And people around there say, hey, that's the show to be. If you want a lot of people to hear you, and in any event, look at your competitors have been there, etc. Yeah. Right? So a lot of work that goes into just getting the guests and talking to them. But remember, I'm not a journalist, so I don't worry too much about people second guessing my interviews. The reality is, with an hour, which I have now, which is actually less than an hour because they sell 15 minutes of that time. So I've got 45 minutes to talk to somebody, a big person. I can't talk to them about every chapter and verse. People will come and say something. Why didn't you ask him about Robben Island? I mean, when was he on Robben? No, I have to focus. What do I want to get out of this thing? And sometimes you plan with all the best laid out plans. It depends how the person answers you that will make the interview.
And there's so much I want to ask you just off what you've said. Let me start with, because I'm also interested in the Ramaphosa thing and further understanding that. But with your interviews, I mean, you've made a name for some of the most interesting and hard-hitting and viral interviews. Yeah. And it's not easy on TV in this day and age to do something that catches the attention of the whole culture. Do you have a method for your interviews and how you prepare them? One of the things I've only started to learn with interviewing is you can have all the plans in the world for where you want a conversation to go, right? Like you have, okay, I've got 10 points. And then someone goes in a different direction, but that's interesting. So then you think, well, now, so you have to have a plan, but you have to also be open to listen while you're thinking. Take us through your process, because you clearly understand how to have good interviews.
It's interesting, and I don't take that credit. I think that one of first of all, I'm not a journalist. I need to emphasize this. People don't understand what that means. I've got a lot of career going on somewhere else, except on media. But what happened is that I was given a chance by Given Mkari to say, come and do this show, this controversial show, because we're tired of being nice, just come and do this. And this was out at the back of my book, Let's Talk Frankly, where I really talk to politicians directly and tell them what I think. And that was the whole issue, to say, I'm going to go on air, I'm going to be myself. So I'll talk on air with my guests like I talk to them off air. So
that was a conscious choice on your part.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to talk to them like I'll talk to them off air. So I meet Kwere Mantashe at the SAA lounge, and there's only the two of us there. And if you were a fly on the wall, it would be exactly how I would talk to him if he came to the show. Because I ask him things that he may not expect, and then just keep it going that way, and not necessarily a script. So when I started radio, because I was nervous, and this is the first thing, and so on. My producer Bongi Skosana, so one of the best producers I've ever had. I found her there at Power, so we're very aligned, and that's also important. You and your producer must be aligned so that you don't have to be arguing every day about who to have, why are you having the so and so. So that's the first really big method thing. So we would sit down and say, this year, over the next 3 months, these are the people we want, and this is why we want them. It's not always aligned to the calendar, because, for example, if Mogoeng Mogoeng, we had planned to have him that 3 months, but he came 6 months later. So one day you would wonder, why are they interviewing Mogoeng? Because we are not trying to follow the news cycle. Although that sometimes helps the interviews to make it topical. But sometimes somebody hasn't spoken. I don't know when last you had Ronnie Casserell speaking, for example. And so he'll be on my show in February. And we've already set the date, and it's like 22nd February. Now, on that day, there may be a breaking news story, and the channel may think, why are we talking to Ronnie Casserell? But you never know what may happen in that regard. So we trust our own process to say we are bringing out South Africans who don't talk often to come and talk and share their perspective. Secondly, we are not guided or prisoner of the news cycle. So, but we can always find a way to that person to comment on the news cycle. So, Nkosana Dlamini Zuma came to the show, and even the channel was saying, why is this person coming to the show? During ahead of ANC conferences, you always have contestations about who must come, who mustn't come. So that's we're not excluded from that. So I said, no, she must come. We'll hear what she has to say. She was a contender last time. She's a contender now. During her interview, the Pala Pala story broke, that the president has a case to answer. Now, you couldn't have planned that. Yet she was on air the following day because of that show, commenting on that issue. So the method there is to say, trust in the process. We're having a national conversation. Some days may be exciting, some days may be boring. But we are true to the mission, in a sense, to try and unlock the debates in South Africa. I was about to say to you, when I started, I used to have what we call 10 tough questions. So we brainstorm with the producer and we come up with these 10 questions. We want to ask him 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Half the time we don't even get to question 5. Right? For 2 reasons. One is that you may realize or not, this is no longer relevant, or they have answered them already. So if you can't ask them again, one of the things that I pride myself is nobody has ever said to me in an interview, maybe it's still coming, but I've already answered that. Or if you listened, you would have heard that I've already answered. You don't want that. So you need to you have your wits about you on that one. So we then decided, after a year of doing this, we abandoned that style. We just said, when I would do a broad research, if we are lucky, like in this instance, we have a researcher whose full-time job is to research. So say, I'm interviewing Dr. Mpofu-Walsh. Just look up his background, what things he said before. Is there a clip we can use that's interesting? We make a list. They come and give you a pack that can then become like something you can fall on. But it's really only a backup. Right? So we are now at the point where we are saying we've got nothing to prove per se. We are just doing a job of stoking conversations. That's why on my current show we call them conversations that build. Right? How can we take this country forward? Let's talk about a variety of things. Doesn't mean we want to hold you accountable. So I've got 2 types of shows. There's one show where I hold somebody accountable, so it's like a hard talk type of thing. And there's another show where we bring elders so that we can tap into their wisdom. And we put them on a nice royal couch and we have an easy chat. Sometimes it can go wrong, like a Mogoeng Mogoeng interview. We try to call him to honor him for finishing his term as Chief Justice, and he started to fight. And we fought with the media through us and what, so it's not, you have to take the good with the bad sometimes.
That's another thing that people don't appreciate, is that if you do an interview and maybe someone else wanted to interview that person, and then different people in the media start talking, and you have to deal with this background noise of, people having an opinion on what questions you asked, the tone you adopted, why you invited that person and not this person. And you've got to hold that all while trying to drive your agenda.
Yes. But before I comment on it, because that's an important issue, because the reality is that person can be interviewed by in this case, all the 3 TV channels. Sure. And we get different things from there, right? So I don't, spend too much time worrying about what people may or may not say. I do listen, so that, maybe in the future you can improve this, you can improve that. Yeah. But the bottom line is to be yourself. Secondly, I'm conducting it as a conversation and not an interrogation per se. That way, I don't have qualms about the fact that the time I ran out, I couldn't ask the following 10 questions. That person will come back. Almost all my guests are return guests. Because even though it took time to get them there, once they are there, they realize, it's not so bad. Because unlike when they are on Bongani Bingo for 5 minutes, I've got 45 minutes. So they've got time to explain themselves. And there are 2 breaks in between, and we talk in between the breaks sometimes, depending on how tense or not tense the interview is, So it's important that everyone, you are authentic, you are yourself, and you conduct that. You are not trying to be a ready club or who's the other tough journalist who used to do Third Degree?
Deborah Patter. Yeah, sure.
Those are their own people.
And that's great for them.
That's great for them. I'm my own, right? The other thing I want to talk about this thing of these 10 tough questions. Yeah. I always give this anecdote. In a few years ago, when Bekele came back as minister, remember he was fired first as commissioner, then he came back as minister. He was now my guest. And I was very, very prepared. I read up the whole crime statistics, the latest ones, right? And the way I structured my interview was that I was going to take each statistic and interrogate him, murder, close contact crime, whatever, right? And with their numbers, and then show that are these things out of proportion with the resources they're spending. So I was really quite, if you like, over-prepared for the interview. Yeah. Question 1. Why is it that you give us statistics over time? They used to have this averaging of statistics. They won't give you what has happened the last 3 months. They give you what happened the last 5 years, and then come and give you a rosy picture. Sure. He just said to me, those statistics are fake. I said, what? Yeah, I just know they're fake. They fake these things, man. Because remember now, he's coming with enthusiasm of now, having reclaimed his power and so on, and he's free to talk now. And he's
now, if you came back and said, okay, anyway, my second...
No, it's good, but I told you they're fake. So it means I had to abandon my whole line of questioning and talk about something else. Fortunately, with the SABC, my show was called Frankly Speaking there. It was only 24 minutes. It was very short. It was 30 at 8:30, 9 o'clock is finished, including. So I had time to breathe and try to figure out what the hell am I going to ask. But Bekele is an interesting character. I can move now to go and interview him, and the interview will happen because he talks non-stop. So he tends to make it easy for an interview. And most difficult interviews, the person who answers with short questions and listens to you and keep quiet.
Yeah, one word.
And you are in trouble. Yeah.
I once had this interview when I was standing on radio. The first place I stood in on radio was for you at Power Perspective. And I stood in at 702 as well for a while. And I had one interview where this person was just looking out the window, giving me one-word answers. And the way you rack your brains for like, what's the next question? What's the next thought? Yeah, exactly. So to come back to the president and that interview, what was his demeanor like? Because again, we see it via camera, but now he's sitting there. What could you glean from the way he answered the questions? What was he like with the other journalists? I haven't seen the president in person a lot. I don't think I've ever met him face to face unless when I was very young. But I remember seeing him at the Marikana Commission because I was there just watching, and he was facing lots of difficult questions that day. And I'll never forget his calmness. he was just, it was a tough day for him. Like, it could have gone either way. And he came in and he just exuded a certain calm where you realize this person has been doing this for a long time. What were your impressions?
It was interesting because one of the big questions I had was, how is this going to be different? Because it was like the second time I'm interviewing him. Yeah. It's actually a prestige in a newsroom when they are selected to do that. So it was the second time this happens. They could have given it to anybody else, but they insisted I do it. So I was wondering, my God, I was under pressure to say, how will this be different? He was different this time because he came back with a lot of confidence from winning Nasrec 2, so to speak. Yeah. So he was able to have a more, if you like, a very more confident banter. Even before the interview, by the way, we made jokes because he had promised that he was going to come to my show a year ago and he didn't come. So I said to him, well, it looks like it's an anniversary of our promise to each other. So
you're not the only one who hasn't had
no, I know, but I try to just focus on my show to say, please, when can you come? Even now in this interview, at the end, I said to him, can we repeat that promise? And he says, no, it's up to you how you execute the promise, but I promise to come, So I don't know, I don't have hope that he will come, especially with the Pala thing. Even now, I suspect they wanted to cancel this round of interviews because they knew what we were going to ask. The first thing on the agenda is, how are we dealing with the Pala thing? And if you didn't ask that, then you're not asking what your viewers are really looking for, right? Because how does 44,000 delegates just not discuss this matter for weeks, as we had seen?
The NEC kicks it to the conference kicks it back to the MMA.
You see?
Well, we've dealt
he couldn't answer. But I think, more to your point, he was very, very confident. I think, in fact, he's underrated in as far as being able to engage publicly, which is a pity because his team doesn't seem to get it right that he must regularly be in front of journalists and answer questions, because I think, in fact, he can. Obviously, there needs to be a lot of work that precede the interview. And I'm not talking about preparing for the interview. I'm talking about just being briefed. I don't think he was kept adequately briefed on the ESCOM thing. Because if you think about it, he's now cancelled this trip to Davos, right? Which suggests that was he given more information before last week? Because this crisis, as I was interviewing me, we were on stage 4, Loadshedding. Right? And he was busy trying to make a joke of it. I said, no, actually, I'm not wanting to comment about every man and their dog. I want to comment about ESCOM. Right? The CEO was poisoned 2 days prior, or at least the story about that broke. He had never said anything about it. He had never said anything about Andre de Ruyter's resigning. He had never said anything about his ministers fighting over many things, including the position of Andre de Ruyter. So it's not like we're asking him to comment about everything. We're just asking him to be serious.
It's not the biggest crisis.
So fast forward a week later, he's cancelled Davos. He's calling meetings with opposition political parties. Now, if there was thorough planning of this crisis, those are the things you should have mentioned last week. To say, I'm taking this seriously. In fact, in a week's time, I'm meeting political parties. I'm meeting the energy, whatever it's called, crisis committee. You understand? So it looks like there's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the current crisis. Maybe we are saying this because maybe we don't know the detail. But at least from those round of interviews, both mine and the others, he didn't seem to be too bothered. He even said to me something like, that's why I have ministers. Why do you want me to talk about this? Now, does he not have ministers now? He should just go to Davos and say, I've got ministers. But he didn't do that because he can realize that now the country is getting fed up by the day.
And that's where I'd like to move because, look, South Africa has been in a crisis for a long time. It's actually difficult to remember the times when we weren't in serious political, economic, social crisis. But this year, we've just awoken to this complete collapse of ESCOM. And it feels like the demoralization of the nation is at an all-time high. What's your assessment of where the country is right now and where the Ramaphosa presidency is right now?
There's a lot of demoralization from all sorts of angles. We will need a whole day to talk about them. But let me pick this whole issue about, if you like, the moral state of collapse. We're in a moral collapse. In other words, where anything goes type of thing. I don't have a lot of time for John Steenhuisen, but his speech in Parliament, I think, was quite seminal ahead of the Phala vote. And this is what I had been saying for a while, to say, what's the difference between Phala and Nkandla? There's no difference. The ANC did exactly the same thing. In the face of many reports, they went to Parliament and voted down the Nkandla report until the Constitutional Court had to say to them, no, but you got to do the right thing. Right? And you would think, as John Steenhuisen was referring to this, you would think that the ANC would then learn from that to say, hey, being a majority in Parliament doesn't mean we can easily just sweep something under the carpet. So we're back to that cycle, and I won't be surprised if the parties decide, okay, majority rule is trumped us now, but let's go to the court and insist that Ramaphosa must account. For example, now, besides the parliamentary process, you got the Integrity Commission, which was established exactly to take us out of this morass of moral collapse, because people will say, oh, I'm innocent until proven guilty. Oh, but what about the moral question? So unfortunately, we're in that point, and a lot of people, me included, in 2017, we cited as a relief, a collective relief, that Ramaphosa came instead of NDZ, because we saw NDZ as an extension of JZ. Yeah. Right? But we are now disappointed, and that's why I'm saying there's a despondency. And the moral collapse fuels that, because how will Ramaphosa say to Gwede Mantashe, please resign? You should have said that to him long ago, by the way. Gwede Mantashe is a central figure, or maybe not so central, but was one of the figures mentioned in the Bosasa debacle within the state capture. Right? Apparently they installed cameras at his house and he doesn't know. He's not aware of it. It sounds like Zuma all over again. People build a 260 million rand wall around your property. You have no idea. You just walk in and out and you see people very busy, but you don't ask them. So Gwede doesn't know that his houses have cameras from Bosasa. They were not paid by the state. They were paid because they wanted to buy his favor as Secretary General. That's the person who is the chairperson of the ANC today. Do you think Ramaphosa is going to discipline that person now? Especially after the role that Gwede played to keep him in power. Nomvula Mogoeng, same thing. He should have resigned long ago. She should be far away from a public office. Far. She's in the heart of it. In fact, she will be running the ANC for all intents and purposes. But that becomes a shield now. Both her and Gwede are shielded by the fact that they now propel Ramaphosa to power. And it will be silly for Ramaphosa to talk about disciplining them. What will that then happen? That will collapse discipline. And I asked him a straight question in an interview to say, are you worried about the discipline in the ANC, that everybody seems to be doing their own thing? Your own ministers can just show a middle finger. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, Minister Susulu told the president in no uncertain terms that he's a liar. Just a few months ago, we understood that there was a strategy that let's leave her alone so that she doesn't campaign using the fact that she's a victim. And they saw him, the whole Zuma playbook of victimology. Yeah. But now that excuse is gone. Ramaphosa has now been reaffirmed by the ANC. Is he going to act against Sisulu? Let's talk about Sisulu specifically. Let's forget about Jay's NDZ, because you could say she voted according to her conscience, and in fact we support that she was supposed to vote. Everybody else was supposed to vote like that. But this one, who ran away even from the vote, right, has been insulting the president the whole year. It's untenable. In a cabinet, you're not supposed to be able to know you have people who you can rely on in terms of your broad agenda, etc. And that decorum between president and minister has been broken long ago, and it would be very bad for Ramaphosa to keep her for whatever political unity reasons or whatever else. So, back to your question, for me that's the first thing, the first definer of where we are. Moral collapse, corruption is getting worse, not better under Ramaphosa, unfortunately. The only tinkle of hope was the NPA. I don't know what your view is, but I don't think they have done what they promised 3 or 4 years ago in terms of...
I think it's been dramatically underwhelming.
Yeah. In terms of the big fish, don't give me with some petty thieves here. I want the big fish.
I'm with you, and I think there's also a difference between administrators and even people who ran SOEs, so CEOs and politicians.
Yeah.
So yes, we've seen some people like Brian Moleka, for example, but show me a senior ANC politician that has been in court. You won't find it.
Actually, exactly what I said to him, to say, and he was saying, no, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong on the display. No, mostly we get it wrong. Because he has been a report, apparently, and I may get the number wrong, but there's a long list of ANC people who have been mentioned in that report. Right? Are you telling me the president couldn't find one person to fire, just one, to say, sorry, not in my cabinet. Not under, as I said to him, under your nose, There are people there who are there at your behest. They're not there because of labor law, CCMA and what. You can say to them, sorry, you gotta go. That way you send them a better message about being serious about discipline. So far, he called a family meeting, told us what SIU must do, NPA must do, the Hawks must do.
Which Zondo had already said they must do.
Yeah, and when it comes to what he must do, he says, I'm still thinking about it. We are perishing a year since the report has been out. He kicked the ball to middle of the year, and then kicked it further on because of the ANC conference, so that he doesn't seem to be polarizing those who was going to support. Because if you were to act, by the way, he would get rid of my friend Zizi. I got a lot of time for this, but sorry on this one. He would have to ask Gwede to resign, ask Thabo Makwetla to resign. Those three that are in his immediate purview. He doesn't need a long process on that. He doesn't need anything other than moral courage. Unfortunately, we are running out of leaders with moral courage. So for me, that summarizes the crisis. We're in a leadership crisis. We're in a moral collapse crisis. Those things are fueling the bigger economic crisis. Because once you have this shifty way of approaching things, why must I think you're going to have a backbone on dealing with economic difficult questions, ideological questions that relate to the economy, tackling big business and getting them to do what they're supposed to do? All of those things, people are not going to laugh when you try and exercise authority on those things, when you fail at things that are immediately in your purview.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's been interesting to me about the Ramaphosa presidency, I have this theory that the Zuma presidency was about private interests capturing the state. But the Ramaphosa presidency was about the state capturing private interests. So Ramaphosa very successfully captured key elements of the media, captured key elements of civil society, and brought them on side within the state agenda. Sure, there were exceptions and all of that, but in doing that, he shielded himself from the kind of criticism that other presidents have received. And suddenly, we sit here 5 years later and realize there was an accountability vacuum, and now look where we are. And there's been some criticism on those of us who work in the media space that we got wrong-footed. We got dribbled by President Ramaphosa. He allowed this idea that just give me some time, give me some space, don't put the pressure on, and all will be fine. And now we have been complicit in the media in allowing that sense of unaccountability.
No, we have been. We have been. I mean, you should have seen how a Pulemavi dealt with us as collectivism. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe we've come to a point where an official of the ANC can just come and insult you together in a meeting, and there will be no consequence about it. There will be no cry from SANEF. There will be no... So that accountability vacuum shows, it's not the only place where it shows, but in the interaction with the media, it shows that we have not made enough noise that as a fourth estate, is not a favor for a head of state to come and address us regularly. It's not a favor that he should go to the major news outlets from time to time, knowing that those news outlets are being followed by millions of people who are his constituency. Right? So at the moment, it's like it's all a favor. He can come, he may not come. So I'll come to your show for 2 hours. It's a year later. He doesn't think there's anything wrong. He says, the promise still stands. So he may get out of office even before coming to talk to us. Right? So if you look at the other presidents, the same theme has been there, unfortunately. There's no culture in the presidency, whether it be that of Zuma or Mbeki or even Mandela, Right? Mandela maybe a slight exception because we're still in euphoria. But otherwise, all the other presidencies, they behave the same way as royalty of some sort. They can't be accessed. I mean, a lot of people, another criticism I'm getting is, but why are you interrupting this guy? I said, why shouldn't he be in there? He interrupts my life every day with load shedding. So I'm going to interrupt you. That's part of my style. It's not always perfect. But it says, you work for me. You understand? There's a lot of difference, right, in the media to politicians and ministers, not just even to the president. If you watch some of the ministers being interviewed, you would swear that they agreed on questions before, because an obvious follow-up doesn't happen, and then you wonder why was that question not asked, and you are not able to get a clear answer. So that vacuum of accountability has been there. I don't buy the story that the media necessarily was captured. I think sometimes we as a media must also take responsibility for being unable or unwilling to push the boundaries when it comes to trying to get something out of politicians. And we don't all have to be investigative journalists to do that. Sometimes it's just basic questions and culture that we have allowed to slip in. For example, there are some ministers who will never do interviews. I don't know when last you saw Minister Mashawani doing an interview about gender-based violence, the scourge that's killing us in this country. Yet that's a full-time job. I don't know when last you saw a full-on interview with a DD Mabuza. Mabuza has finished his term of office without doing a media interview. 5 years. Who's there to blame? It's us who are to blame, because we've never pushed to say, government must sit here, let's discuss this thing about how often you are going to get your ministers to come and talk to us. You know, Togo did the same thing. She's in charge of a most critical area of our lives, which has to do with food security and agriculture and what, doesn't do interviews. Right?
And we've just kind of accepted it as normal at this point.
It's accepted as normal. You know, it's accepted as normal. They will come on their own terms. You know, I don't know whether you saw my spat with Tulas Nglesi. You know, Nglesi, I sort of had a tiff with him, and then he went to the BCSA to say this is beyond the freedom of expression. You know, people sometimes get rubbed the wrong way with my rant, and where I just tell them where to get off. Then he went to the CMA asking me to withdraw, and then he lost, and they told him, but you're a public servant. Did he need the BCSA to tell him that? Yet 2 weeks ago, I bumped into him flying out of Mangaung. And then he had said to me, I'm ready to come now. Now that he has something, good that he thinks he has done, he now is ready to come. Of course, he's welcome. But it just shows you that sometimes the leaders have taken a posture that they are in charge. Yeah. You must wait. Right? Hence, I had to remind somebody like Minister Usuli, but you're a public servant. It shouldn't be so difficult to talk to you. You know, you represent me. And if I want to ask you questions, surely it shouldn't be such a difficult thing. But I can mention many. There are lots of ministers, and they are full-time. These people are full-time media liaison officers, full-time spokespersons, full-time people who are head of communication. So one wonders, what do these people do on a day-by-day basis with so much contingent of media trying to knock at the door all the time and being told, no, sorry, can't be done. So in summary, there's a culture of lack of accountability. And I'm not saying the media alone has to do that. There are civil society organizations that want to meet these people. There are ordinary people who want to meet them, right? And it just doesn't happen. Just recently, I was in a community in Limpopo that's been abused by the mining industry. According to the mining charter, communities are supposed to be given a certain percentage of shares in any mining operation as part of the social labor plans, or I don't know what they're called, social plans that are licensing conditions for the mining. And what the common refrain, and there's lots of communities, over 15 mines that are operating in that area, none of them have complied with making sure that those communities receive the 15% or the 5% that's entitled to them. Yeah. Secondly, there are some communities on whose land these mining companies have gone to mine without parting with 1 cent to the title deed holders of that land. The common refrain was, we have been writing to the Minister of Minerals forever, and he has been dismissive and arrogant to us. That was a common refrain. And it's not new. If you remember what happened to that, there was a mining situation also in the Eastern Cape, Klobeleni, or I don't remember the... Kolobeni, yes. Right? Same theme, right? That the Minister of Minerals sided with multinationals against the community.
In the Shell case as well.
There's still that Shell case, but there's also been the Lily Mine case. 3 black bodies are at the bottom of a mine for more than 1,000 days or something. The minister doesn't think there's anything untoward. He says, actually, in one, doorstop interview, well, what do you expect me to do? I need an investor who can put money. I'm told that to extract those bodies, it will cost about 120 million rands. Right? The Mineral Council has about 25 CEOs sitting there. With their change, those CEOs can dig up that body if the minister just told them to do that. To say, guys, you got your licenses that are coming up. I expect you to do something socially responsible. Right? I can promise you now, and I've said this many times, if there was a mine manager there, or white mine manager who was stuck at the bottom, they would have spent that 120 million, even just at that mine. In a day, the government would have spent, they would have found that money and dug up that. But those 3 black lives, they don't matter. You see, this is the sentiments, and we can't, sort of squeeze all the sentiments in this 1 hour interview. But that's what people are feeling. They're feeling robbed. They're feeling betrayed. There
we go.
And there we are. And on that note, it switches off.
Just a perfect timing.
So we're back, and our interview got cut short by load shedding, just like I'm sure many of your lives have been, and our lives continue. Yeah. But we're gonna keep going. We've been talking a lot about what it's like to be a broadcaster, also the state of the country. We're now confronting a watershed election, by all accounts. 3 decades into this democracy, we now have an election in 2024 where a lot of this is going to come to a head. How are you thinking about the 2024 election? It seems like we're on the eve of one of the biggest and most important campaigns in our history.
When I get that question, I often wonder whether it's the wish of whoever is asking me. And because I ask that a lot. Because I think South Africa needs a change. But I'm not sure whether the ingredients are in place for that change to happen. I'll tell you why. If you remember, even the 2019 election, there was a frenzy to say, this is it, it's going to go down. We're going to use our vote and our power to get the ANC out, because the same set of facts are still in place, that the ANC is disappointing people. In 2019, it was after 25 full years of democracy, this is what's going down. Now, next year we'll say 30 years, actually, to be exactly on the stroke of 30 years of democracy. South Africans haven't made the switch from loyalty voting to let's vote for you because you are competent to do this. Right? That's why the 2019 elections, the outcomes were the same as the previous one. Where you've got ANC, DA, AFF, and then the rest. Almost similar proportions. There isn't, and now because we've got some 1 or 2 new players for the coming elections, but it's all a splinter, a splinter of existing parties. Right? So EFF split from the ANC, as COPE did, as UDM, as IFP, as PAC. Right? Nothing original. So it's a chip of the old block. Right? Action SA is a chip of the DA, and I know that Herman may not like to hear that, but that's the reality. You only have to look at the so-called Senate of Action SA. It's half of the people there are from the DA. The chairperson of that party is actually a former DA person. In fact, according to Dr. Koza, who left in a half. He says actually he's the guy who's running the place. So a white cabal is running the place according to that Koza. We can't argue with her. She was there. She experienced it. I've got a lot of time for my shower, by the way. But I'm not sure whether his movement is enough to debase the ANC. Right? So unfortunately, we can hype ourselves up, but change will come, but it will not come as fast as we want. If you look at the local government elections, that has never happened that the ANC gets, to 45. That's like far from 50, right? Unfortunately, that's not a real reflection of how the national vote may come out. The ANC has a way of coming out and remobilizing people because of its patronage. There are a lot of people are thinking, my God, if these people get out of power, I'm in trouble. And so when moments like this come where the ANC is facing a possible loss of power, they have a way of remobilizing people to make sure that doesn't happen. Interestingly, in 2009, when COPE was the first sort of split of that significance.
Yeah. Which you saw up close.
Absolutely. Mbalula, right, at that point, the campaigner, the chief organizer, I don't know what they called, but he went out of his way. He threw everything at making sure that that COPE project doesn't succeed. Right? He's now General Secretary. And he feels, in my view, that he's going to go toe-to-toe with a Julius Malema. You say, how best can I dip into my youth league days, the way that we used to organize and save the ANC? So we may be faced with an ANC that wins again, even albeit by a small margin. Because the opposition, unfortunately, the opposition is not organized.
No, I hear you. I was talking to some, let me not give it away who I was talking to, but I was talking to someone in our politics. And remember there was that thing that people were laughing at with Ramaphosa and fixing a road by putting a small thing into a pothole and driving over it or whatever. And this person was saying, you laugh, and many people laugh, but you don't understand the wisdom of this within this constituency. And the ANC knows its constituency. They know how to hold on. And I'm with you. I'm also scared myself, speaking for me, that there's a lot of talk of change, but we underestimate the extent to which the ANC is embedded in the political consciousness in South Africa. I have always said, I think we have to send that message that you can lose power if you misgovern. So that's how I think about 2024. But whether it will happen or not is not something I'm sure of either way.
I'm a big campaigner for change, and a lot of people would expect that between now and 2024 I'll be shouting my lungs out for the ANC to get out. Right? But I've done that even previously for the 2019 elections, etc. At the end of the day, the opposition have to have a new strategy. Right now it's too fractured, right? Which means that you're going to divide the vote. So whether they can, with the ideological difference or spectrum difference, they could actually do a common front that says, whatever our differences, we need a change. I don't know whether that will happen. The DA is still led by a white person after all these years. And he seems to be willing to hold on to that. The experiment of bringing in a black leader didn't work, but it's my view that they need to try and go back to that, because if you look at this scenario where the DA gets a big majority in the coalition, right, and the ANC loses, it means that we'll be led by John Steenhuisen as president.
We've spoken to a lot of people about that very question here on this show, and they're also going to their Congress this year.
No, they are, but John seems to be determined to return as leader instead of giving, a young, dynamic black leader to at least give them a fighting chance of removing the plateau, because they've plateaued. So they could say we've got the white vote, But even there, it's not guaranteed because they now have a radical right in the Freedom Front and so on, chipping at their votes. And this has happened over the last 2 elections. So that block of votes doesn't guarantee them power. But if they were to go back to saying the bigger constituency of votes is actually black people, so it makes sense to actually have a black leader. It doesn't matter, you can think it's racist and what. This is real politics here. Right? They are not going to manage because the other parties are going to use that, the fact that they are still led by a white person after 30 years, right, to decampaign them, and come the time where they must now sit as opposition parties and decide who's going to be president. Even if the DA is number 2, it's likely that they are going to all vote against the DA being the president. They'll say, no, we'll give you ministries and so on.
Yeah.
But we are not going back to having a white president. Unfortunately, these are the real politics.
No, sure.
The DA people are serious about governing South Africa. They have to start at their Congress now to put in place this whole theme of them chasing black leaders and black leaders flying off the bandwagon of the DA is actually not good for them.
Yeah.
But, who's going to listen? Is Helen Zena going to listen to that? Is John Stevens going to listen to that?
Yeah.
Or they are happy in their laha? These people were ready to give up Johannesburg instead of coalescing with the EFF and the HNS. Those people had to impose mayorship on them. Which is quite strange. I mean, you can never know what going to do next.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Impose a mayorship on somebody. But sending a message that says there's a need for a realignment of politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside the ideology. And I know that it's not an easy thing for a lot of comrades to absorb.
Sure.
But we're at that point now where we must decide. Do we want to be sitting in the dark line now? Or can we put a competent government in place that will make sure that these sorts of things are minimized?
And that's part of what we've been driving a lot on this channel is it's all well and good to focus on the election and focus on 2024, for example, but are we having conversations about what the country looks like after the ANC, if that is in 2024 or 2029? And have we crafted a vision for that post-ANC country, which goes from the constitution to the economy to local government? It doesn't seem to me that vision is very fleshed out, either in the opposition, but even just in society. We haven't actually kind of prepared ourselves, even intellectually. You would think there would be intellectuals in the country saying, okay, this is the next stage of this project. But it seems like that conversation is still at a very early stage.
So there's a lot of even racism in the way that we deal with migration. I was on holiday somewhere in some lodge, and the workers, they found a way to corner me to say, hey, you have to help us because there are some white immigrants here who don't even have papers. But there are always Home Affairs cars here coming to fetch a big envelope. Right? So if it's a black migrant and what, they must be shot and arrested and thrown out of the country, and this, Mosoeu will regale us with this border management committee and what have you. And then you've got, it depends on your color. If you are a migrant from another European country, you don't have papers, you can actually be running an establishment here. And bribing your way through easy. It's all about resources. It's a whole class divide that comes. So those were my 3 key issues of building a new republic to learn from. It's not the totality of a vision, like you are correctly saying.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think it's impossible for the current opposition parties to come together and say, outside the ANC vision, right? Because fortunately the ANC has delivered to us a constitution that gives us a framework of what we need to do. It's not like they're going to scratch their heads and come up with crazy stuff that's not in the constitution, right? Yeah. And it's secondly, it's less about the policies. I mean, there may be 1 or 2 policies that are off. But generally, the policies that the ANC has put in place are great. It's not the problem of the policy. It's the problem of making those policies real for ordinary people to survive.
Well, Prof, load shedding has sabotaged us. But thanks so much for sharing your insights, your analysis. Thanks for the work you do. think part of this show is also elevating people who are doing great things and saying, we see you, we see those difficult interviews and how they work, and keep up the great work. And
no, thank you. I'm quite honored to be interviewed by you. It's not every day where you're interviewed by an Oxford scholar. I may ask you a very difficult theoretical question, and you may be stuck.
If you're interviewed by an Oxford scholar, make sure you're a professor.
No, thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah.
So you have to come to my show.
Anytime, I'm ready.
So it's going to be soon.
As long as it's not, as long as you don't have 10 tough questions for me.
No, I won't have any tough questions. We're going to have 1 hour, and actually,
no, I'd love that.
I want you to come so we can honor you for the work that you have done.
No,
It don't be an interrogation about anything. We're coming to have this conversation on my show about what next for the Republic. That will be the topic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Done deal. Thank you.
All right.
Aye.